My name is Martin Matter with the Witness to War Foundation. It's April 12th, 2024, and we're at the VFW in Falcon, Colorado. I'm sitting with Mr. Ric Chavez, RICCHAVEZ, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan in the United States Army in multiple units, including 1st Battalion, 14th Infantry, and the 118 Cav. How are you doing today, Ric?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. Appreciate you joining me this morning. My first question today is, where are you from originally?
Originally, I'm from Los Angeles, California.
And tell me about growing up. What are your folks like?
My dad served time in the Marine Corps and also in the Army Reserve, Vietnam. And my mom was a homemaker for most of it, but then as she got into the workforce, she ended up doing medical claims for the VA. And then when my dad was making his move out of military service, he also was working for the VA. Yeah.
Did your dad talk about his service in Vietnam much at all growing up?
Not a lot. No. My dad had a very significant barrier to discuss Vietnam. There was plenty of memorabilia around the house. He had books and pictures, but it was something he never really elaborated on. And I was too young to really kind of understand it, and I didn't want to ask either. It kind of raised some anger issues here and there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Any other military history? Uncles, grandfathers?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, uncles, grandfathers on my mom's side, and then my older brother. He also served in the Army Reserve, and he also deployed a handful of times.
Wow. So was joining the service something you thought about doing yourself growing up, or do you have other ambitions?
No, I had zero ambition. I was not even projected to graduate high school. I had been dropped from one high school. I had been dropped from the district, and while I was with one of my friends who he had some interest in the military, Army recruiter showed up. I just happened to be at the house. We chatted it up, and the Army recruiter was really an honest, down-to-earth guy where he said, I just want you to graduate high school, and let's make a deal. And then the deal was, I'll get you into a school, we'll get you graduated, and upon graduating, I don't even care. I just want you to think about joining the Army. And I said, okay. So we got it all set up where he would pick me up and then drive me to the school in a different district so I can finish up high school. And then I got a notice that I was complete with all my classes. I went to the office, called my recruiter. He picked me up, and a few days later, he said, what do you want to do? I said, I'm going to join. You got me to graduate. I joined, and probably a few weeks later, I was already on my way to Fort Benning, Georgia.
Okay. And what year was that?
1996. And I was in basic training in 97, and while I was in basic training, AIT, my diploma actually got delivered to the recruiter office. So when I got back from basic training, AIT, my recruiter actually gave me my high school diploma.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So tell me about your time at Benning. Anything stick out to you about that?
There was one particular very important event that happened that it wasn't just me, it was just I remember the suck factor of this day was it's in the middle of the night and we were doing a ruck march and it was a very long night and we saw a comet and it was great. We were just in the woods and we saw this comet just fly over. It looked great. Drill sergeant said, hope you enjoyed it, keep walking. So we kept walking, and then the next morning we found out that was the Heaven's Gate cult had committed mass suicide that night. So that's the only way that I'm able to kind of remember when that happened in 97 was, I think it was the Haley Bob comet.
Yeah.
And so I just remember looking it up. They said, enjoy it, man, keep walking. Kept walking. Next morning found out the cult did it. And so, but I do have one little takeaway that has given me a very early version of PTSD, I guess, in a sense. It was Valentine's Day, 1997. In the dining facility, they slopped on my tray like a mountain of sweet potatoes, like with all the stuff on it. And I couldn't eat it. Just wasn't sitting with me. And then 2 cups of water, and my drill sergeant was yelling and chewing up everybody. We have 2 minutes to eat. I went to the trash can I knew I shouldn't have done this, but I went to the trash can and I scraped all of it to the trash because I couldn't eat it anymore. And he's like, you know what that means? That means you want more. So he took me back. They made a larger pile, and I was at a trash can, and I would have to eat and then vomit because I couldn't control it, and then vomit and do it over and over and over, rinse my mouth with water and keep eating and vomit. He's like, no, you finish your food, get out. And then we'd go on a run. So since that, I don't eat sweet potatoes at all. I don't like the smell. I don't like anything associated with it. And
Can't blame you.
that's my only real takeaway. It's probably not a good one. That's my only real takeaway from basic training, and is that. And then AIT, when I finished basic training as one station unit training, you don't go to new drill instructors. You're just there, right? So it was something where our drill sergeants had said, hey, you guys just finished, congratulations. And you go, no, you still belong to us. So he's like, pack your stuff, we're walking. And we packed up and walked out and did training the next day. It was no break. And so, but that's what it was. And I kind of started to enjoy that because I knew what was coming up for the next few weeks is just nonstop training. Right. So, which helped me get to my first unit. So,
Which was?
That was 1st Battalion, 14th Infantry, Golden Dragons, at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii.
So what they have you done on Hawaii?
So believe it or not, when I got to Hawaii, I did my in-processing, which took about a week, and I got picked up. They picked me up in a Humvee. They took me to the unit, and they said this wonderful piece right here is called the CQ desk. This is a 24-hour duty, and you were already 12 hours in. So they put me on CQ for 24 hours when I got there. The next morning, I was relieved of my duty. They finally gave me a room. I still didn't have a room. Gave me a temporary room. They said, we'll be back in a few hours. Get some sleep. Got some sleep, got back up, showered, got ready. They issued me a weapon, and then I went out to the field for 2 weeks. So I didn't get to enjoy really Hawaii my first time. It was just going straight out to the field. Right. And I met my platoon out there. It was at, it was firing point 215, and stayed out there for right around 2 weeks, finished that up, and then went back. And that training schedule at the time in the 90s was you would go out for a week, come in for 2 weeks, go out for 3 weeks, come in for 2 weeks. And it was kind of a nonstop. And that was my first interpretation of this is how the Army is. And I actually kind of enjoyed it, where you're training, working hard, and then you get a little bit of downtime, but you're going to go back out and train. And I thought that's really what the Army was. But I found out soon enough it was not.
Well, I want to hop forward a couple years and ask about 9/11, where you were and what you remember about that day.
So 9/11, I was actually in the National Guard. I had figured I was just going to knock out some time there, kind of reevaluate if I wanted to stay active duty, do National Guard, or just get completely out. I was living in Covina, California. My brother called me, and he said, hey, are you watching the news? I said, no. And he said all the phrases. Hey, they think America's being attacked, plane crashing in the World Trade Center. Another one, I think, is going towards the White House. And then I turned on the TV and saw the first tower had already been hit. And as I was trying to assess everything, I called my platoon sergeant and I said, hey, what's the deal? He said, stand by the phone. He's like, I'm trying to find out more information. We might muster and we'll meet. I said, okay. My wife at the time had to go into another city to go get our daughter who was staying with the grandparents. And I just stayed and sat by the TV and watched the second plane hit and started getting all the news reports. And it was just one of those very heavy moments. And we didn't get called in we didn't have to report. And so it was a few days later. I didn't get this overwhelming anger or rush. I just said, I don't belong here anymore. I don't belong in California. I want to go back to active duty. My wife at the time said, yeah, I think so. I called up a recruiter and I said, hey, can I get back in? And he's like, let's see what we can do. And they sat me in front of a panel, asked me a bunch of questions on why I got out, why I want to come back in. And I basically told them I got out because I wanted to go to school and get a job, and I did 4 years. I was honorably released. 9/11 happened, and I feel I need to go back in. And it was a minute later, they were like, process this kid, get him to MEPS and on his way. Did a quick run through MEPS, and then they assigned me to Fort Hood in Texas. which is now Fort Cavazos. And I was assigned to 1st Brigade, 366 Armor.
And had you gotten much armor training before that, or was this your first armor assignment?
It's my first armor assignment, and it was a complete 180 from being light infantry. It is I don't want to talk bad about the armor community, but there were some positive takeaways, but I can tell that there was a lot of lacking in safety and consideration of soldiers and not taking care of soldiers. And one of those considerations was a tasking that I was on where a 5-ton had rolled over and killed a bunch of soldiers. And one of them was from my platoon. And it was just a lack of safety. It was an urgency because they had to go cut grass. That was the true story. They were assigned to go cut grass. It was rainy. The truck lost its bearing and rolled over and killed a bunch of soldiers. Yeah. But the priority was to cut grass. So because of that, that really made me want to get away from them as soon as possible, but I couldn't because that's when we were already locked in because Iraq was about to happen. And they were like, you're not going nowhere. I called branch manager said, you can't go anywhere. You're already locked in. And then we went to Iraq in 2003 and came back in 2004, went back in 2005, came back in 2006, went back in 2007, came back in 2008. And then I went to Colorado and got ready for Afghanistan.
That was with the 211 ACR?
No, that was with 710 Cav.
Okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So in between all the Iraq stuff, we were transitioning into 710 Cav. We came up to Colorado, and then we as a brigade deployed to Afghanistan as 710 Cav.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So you joined 366 like mid-2002? Is that
2000. 2001 I got there. Was it 2000? It was 2001 I got there,
so
yeah.
like right after 9/11 you got there.
Right.
When do you remember the rumblings about Iraq first starting to hit the dust?
Because I was so new to Fort Hood, and we had already had the unit already had this training event going on where we were doing simulations in a city environment. And it was already on their schedule. It had nothing to really kind of do with 9/11. It was just, this is what we're doing. And we were out. We had been out there for a few days and kind of playing the enemy, shooting back and forth. And our brigade command sergeant major's Humvee came in, and he stood on top of the bullhorn and started yelling, stop, everybody get down. I'm the command sergeant major of the brigade. And I won't throw his name out, but he called everybody. We all came down. And there was probably about 100 of us around his Humvee, and he just said, there's no easy way to code this, man. We're going to Iraq. The president made a determination. At this point here, police up all your stuff, get all your gear together, get back with your platoons, and everybody head back. If anybody questions it, they can come talk to me personally. Okay? So we packed up, got back to the company area, and then our commander said, yeah, we just got the word we're going, so now we're shifting everything. And we're going to get our vehicles out, and we're going to double check weapons. We're going to go qualify, and that started the process of us deploying. So there was no grumblings. We were literally training, and we got notified over Bullhorn, and we're deploying.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And when was it you made it to Iraq for the first time?
2003.
What month?
We got there in April.
So like just after
March.
the invasion?
Yeah, the invasion actually had just happened because we watched the shock and awe on TV at my house. I do remember watching that. And then we left a little bit later. We were in Kuwait for a little while. And I want to say April 1st, we crossed the line. April 1st is when we went into Iraq, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Very cool. Go to Baghdad or somewhere else?
We drove from Kuwait all the way through Baghdad, all that stuff. We just went through it all and ended up north of a town called Beji, which is north of Baghdad. Got to Beji.
Well, you were kind of talking about it earlier, overheard. So
Yeah.
Tell me about your first impressions just going through Baghdad for the first time in April of 2003. What do you remember seeing?
The initial highway, once we crossed into Iraq, it was just kind of like a open desert. And then you would start to see burned, charred vehicles. And it was dozens of them and dozens. then even in the distance, you would see stuff burning, but you couldn't tell if it was just tires or vehicles or houses. But there were things that were burning still. But that first bit was just a lot of destroyed vehicles on the side. One of the guys in my platoon had served in the Marines, and he was in the Persian Gulf, and he was very knowledgeable on it. And he was kind of telling us because we were all in different areas. He was telling us over the radios, like, "Hey, this is what this is." He was a great tour guide for that. Then we started getting into cities. We got into Baghdad. Things got a little heated in Baghdad. The tanks were just running wild, which was an amazing thing to see. These tanks just go and engage targets and continue moving forward, and almost like, I guess you would consider it a textbook play, where it was impressive. We get into Baghdad, go through a few of the palaces, wishing we could be in a palace, and that didn't happen. Can we pause for a minute?
All right, Rick, we left off, we were talking about crossing through Baghdad. You had a guy in there who knew a ton about the region, and you're on your way to Beiji, is that it?
Beiji, yep.
Yeah, what was Beiji?
Beiji was a pretty decent-sized town, and our unit had taken over the K2 airfield. And then through some form of planning, they assigned our platoon to live in a building in the city by ourselves. We were attached, not technically. There was a special forces group that was there, and we lived together and supported each other. So, and it was a great experience, great learning experience.
Army Special Forces?
Army Special Forces, yep. And then over time, the Georgian Army showed up, and they were there, and we had some military police that were there from our division. They were very helpful as well, and we were supposed to be working hand in hand with the Iraqi police, which was like kind of a brand new setup. So that was the unique experience of working with them and trying to figure out what they're doing, and they're showing up in a different vehicle every day, different uniforms, different weapons. So it was a pretty unique experience working with the Iraqi police.
Oh, yeah. And I imagine a lot of them are kind of new recruits since the Iraqi army got disbanded around that time. Is that right?
Yes. You could tell they were fresh. They just wanted a job. They just wanted to do something and help their own country. And it was a noble effort for sure, but they were way in over their head.
Now, did you see any signs of insurgencies ramping up, or?
We did. There was always some sort of gunfire. We were getting mortared. And then we did have the occasional pop shots at us, and then we did have a firefight, about an hour and a half long firefight that was there in Beiji, and that was a pretty intense day, but no injuries on the American side. Yeah.
How big of an opposing force?
Well, we couldn't count them exactly because they were kind of popping out of alleys. But I wouldn't even know what to say. I think if I just had to estimate, it would be maybe 100 to 200 just surrounding. The way we were set up, they had us kind of like probably about 75% surrounded. And yeah, they threw grenades at us and, makeshift bombs and all that good stuff. And yeah, so it was the first thing in the morning, went through that process, and then that was a very long night. But yeah, luckily no injuries whatsoever.
So how would you stay in Beijing? For
that first year, that was where we were primarily set up, but we did go up to Mosul to go do a few things, and Al-Shirgat, and we were tagged to go support some CAG guys, just kind of pull security with them. And when we got to work with them, we didn't pull security. We were actually really blessed. We got to work with them hand in hand, stack on doors, go in houses, chase. It was an amazing experience working with CAG. It's just professionalism was top notch. And then there were the military police were there, and then our number one support, in my opinion, was our scouts. Our platoon was just friends with guys in that scout platoon. And as they were on the airfield, those guys would make an effort to come see us and hang out. And they were really a good group of dudes. Yeah, and it was just a great experience. But we were primarily there. We did do some patrols, a lot of foot patrols, and I think we did enough foot patrols that we went down, I would say, respectively, every little alley and street in Beijing. And there was a time like we could draw a map of Beijing in every street, but times have changed. So I don't know if I remember all of it.
So a lot of guys who were there in like 03, 04 told me like the civilians kind of greeted us as liberators as expected,
They
but
did.
then the attitudes just in a month changed. Like, tell me your interaction with civilians and the people out there.
In that area, there wasn't. I think because we were housed with the Iraqi police, that caused some break with us. We'd get a lot of people that would wave at us. We'd go on patrols. They'd wave. They'd drive by, wave at us, and always want to shake hands and just kind of see what we were doing. But there was a gentleman and his son where they asked, can they make us food? They wanted to start a little restaurant outside our gate, sure, whatever. So came out just about every morning, made eggs and potatoes, and charged us $1 or $2, something. And that's what everybody was eating. And then one day it stopped. We thought I just took a break or whatever. And then I think the story was he was killed because he was serving us food. So then that stopped, obviously. And then we would get we'd get some support. Like, people would come to the gate to tell us, like, hey, I think my neighbor has this, or I think this is happening on this street. And we'd take the information, weigh it, go set a patrol, and see if we come up on something. And we came up on quite a bit. We came up on some resupply type of houses where it's just filled with uniforms and boots and ammunition. And their little garage setup was an anti-aircraft gun. And, so we have to make some calls and get trucks brought in to move all that stuff out, arrest some people, and we'd arrest them, send them over, give them to the Iraqi police, and we just felt they were going to be released anyway, so. But I would say we got a pretty decent amount of support from the locals, and I think just as Americans moved in more over time, that probably, pushed them to separate from supporting America. Yeah.
Now, did you witness the uptick in IEDs during those early days?
In the early days, no, but we did have an actual IED hit a tank, and that was like the first we had ever heard about it. We'd already been in country for many months, and there was this spot. There was a spot getting onto K2 airfield, and it was like a burnout. Just everybody just kind of burned into it. And our platoon sergeant, platoon leader, one of them had said, "Hey, don't go that route. Take the extra way. Don't go. It's not a good corner. That's the one spot they're gonna hit." And it was a few days later they hit it. They put an anti-tank mine in there, and they hit it. So that was our first real, like, wow, they have landmines. Like, they have this stuff here. It wasn't until the IEDs became more prominent, like my second and third deployment, that's the focus. The focus wasn't how many patrols you can do, how many telephone poles you can count. It was more of, we need to be vigilant on these IEDs. And that was a big focus. So
It was like every MSR would just get repopulated with IEDs.
Oh, yeah.
On a nightly basis.
yeah, every day there was something out there. And that's a hard part of the battle, is the IEDs, obviously, but it's not manageable. There's a fair bit amount of luck that goes into not hitting an IED, but there are some times you are able to identify. You can see them. You just got a feeling, but because EOD is a fantastic element, but they are just so under supported. You're waiting days for EOD to come check something, so for safety, you got to be on site. You can't let the civilians walk through. There's kids out there trying to play soccer or whatever. They're trying to run into the area, and you have to block them so they don't, trip it or whatever. So I think it was it wasn't any form of anticipation that the IEDs were going to control the battlefield as much as they did.
Right.
And I think it took our government by surprise that they were doing this stuff because they got crafty. It wasn't just setting up with a tripwire. It was they're using infrared lasers and they're using pressure plates and shape charges. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff.
Wooden box, pressure plates.
All kinds of, yeah.
You know, every time we had the new technology to detect them, they would switch it up.
Right. Yeah, they changed up their battle plan to hit us, and it worked. And then when we figured it out, they'd have a new one, and we were learning from them more than they were learning from us. So, but
I
yeah,
had a fellow last weekend telling me seeing a guy in the poorest part of Iraq talking on a cell phone was the biggest giveaway of all time.
Absolutely.
How do you get a cell phone out here? And you know,
Yeah.
sometimes they're crafty, other times not so much.
yeah, no, and sometimes they were blatant about it. You know, like, well, I got it. I'm gonna go lay it out. They're standing right there with a bag in their hand. But there were other times where the city is just so populated with traffic that they were able to just dig it in the middle of the day. Nobody stopping them, reporting them, and they'd get in a car and leave, and then it's set there. Yeah, so yeah, IEDs played a really big, horrible hit to our units, and then our unit specifically. We had many encounters with IEDs and EFPs, and yeah, so.
Well, outside of the tragic stuff, tell me about some of the guys you're serving with. Anybody stick out in your mind pretty vividly?
Yes. There's quite a few that I thoroughly enjoyed my time working with them. And even though there was some friction, you know, I learned a lot. Am I able to say names?
Yeah.
Okay. I think primarily one of my platoon sergeants, his name's Dan Vasquez. A lot of people didn't want to kind of go work with him or whatever. He was a hard charger. He was very strict, very by the book, and he did it for a reason. I mean, that's how he was brought up in the military, but the reason he did that was that's how we're going to identify problems. That's how we're going to identify our shortcomings. Like, we got to live in these manuals. We got to fix our own vehicles. We don't have, you know, you can't take it. You could take it to your maintenance guy, but the time that person has to fix your vehicle is very minimal because vehicles are getting blown up. Those are a priority to get fixed. Large vehicles, which are his recovery vehicles to go get you, have to be fixed and maintained. And then the maintenance teams were already down by a certain amount of people. So you coming in like, oh, my headlight's out, wasn't gonna get fixed. So we had to live in these manuals and care of the weapons, the crew serve weapons, load plans. It all served a purpose, and he was very, very hard on it, and it frustrated me a lot. But there was one day where I was very upset with him about how we were running the platoon, and I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut because I think you're just gonna write me up. And he's like, no, tell me. And I laid it out. And then after he walked away, I walked away, he came back, shook my hand, and he implemented the plan that I wanted to do. And we ended up deploying again together. And then on that next deployment, I told him I don't want him to run anything. I want him to just leave me alone. And I'll give you your own vehicle, your own crew. Just leave me alone. I work with these guys more than you do. And he did. And he left me alone. He guided me here and there, like, hey, let's not make a right turn. Let's go straight. He would do stuff like that. And then we ended up becoming really good buddies, and he gave me a lot of leadership opportunities, but he also told me how to watch people for their leadership opportunities. So I kind of took that in, and we had some really great people. And we all came home. In our platoon, we had Jarrett Asplund, that guy was excited, just ready to do work, and really intelligent. He's really a good guy. Loved hanging out with him. And then we had Jimmy Marcus Barber, kid out of Texas, and he was your cliched farm kid, you know, the blonde hair, blue eyes, didn't have to work out, but just was physically fit. And you can tell him to do anything and he'll be like, I'm going to go do it. And he'll get it done. He was just that guy. Great kid. And then just so many that were there that just were supportive. Henry Faison, Daniel Holt, just so, I mean, they all went on and did great things too. Some left the military, but the ones who stayed in, they went and did great things. Made great positions, great rank, went to great organizations, asymmetric warfare group, and some of the guys I served with at my first duty station ended up going special forces and just doing amazing work. And just name wise would be like Jeremy Buffet, Kenny Garrett. I already said Dan. And then we get into Garrett Cathcart, who was my XO and my commander multiple times. Then we worked for a general where he was the aide de camp. Garrett got me to be the driver for the general. And then now Garrett got out. He's in the reserves now, but Garrett runs a nonprofit. I've been kind of with him on the nonprofit side for many years now, where I was a fellow in for I think 2 or 3 different nonprofits with him. I was a fellow, and just kind of staying in that realm with him, and then just pushing forward with Derek Bishop, who was a great XO, and Adam Clark, who was a great non-commissioned officer who just retired. And I only served with him in California just for about a year, but the information that guy has, the way he presents himself with his heart and his passion is unequivocal. That guy is an amazing human being. And, and all of these people, I think what made them really great is because they never forgot to go back to the basics, to live with the basics. The Army prints up horrible manuals, but the basic manual won't steer you wrong. It'll teach you how to shoot, how to move, how to communicate, how to fix your vehicle, how to eat, how to shower. There's basic manuals for this stuff. And if you live by the basics, you can only improve. And these guys literally did all that. And if there was a problem, they all met that problem head on and said, we've got to figure this out. So, and I can go on and on to a buddy of mine, John Mock, who was not my commander, but we worked in operations together. And he ended up retiring out, and now he works for the film industry. He has a movie studio. So, it's working and staying with these connections has been really, really helpful. And I really enjoyed working with those guys. I really did.
Well, across 4 deployments, that's 4 homecomings, but I want to hear about the first one, coming out of a combat zone and getting back to the world for the first time. What was that like for you?
It was a little difficult coming back from Iraq the first time. And it wasn't, I think differently on a lot of levels. And when we came back, my only gripe really was I didn't want to be in a closed location around a lot of people, like Walmart. I don't personally like Walmart, but I just didn't like how so many people could be congregated in one area and not do anything, right? Like my understanding is people just go to Walmart to walk around. They don't go there to buy anything. It's almost like our current version of a mall. So that's very frustrating to me. And then people are not responsible for themselves or their kids or anything, and these places are getting torn up. So I didn't want to be around them. I just wanted to step back and leave it alone. So that was my only thing, was I didn't want to be falling into this, I'm always looking over my shoulder or anything like that. And then people that I did deploy with that were not in my platoon, that I did deploy with that came back, I'm not judging them. It just felt like they were the attention grabbers. Like, oh, I can't be around people. I'm always jittery. I'm always looking over my shoulder. And it might be true, but I was there with you. And, PTSD is different for everybody, and I hope it can all be resolved and fixed. Then we could all be great. But if we're doing everything day in and day out, we come back, and then now you're triggered by something else. It just makes me question some things. And I tried to not put myself in that position to be a cliche as a returning veteran. I didn't want that. I didn't like how Vietnam veterans were treated. And that wasn't going to happen. What happened with the Vietnam veterans was not going to happen with global war and terrorism veterans, because at that time, I believe that America was just so diehard on getting to the Middle East. They were supportive. That was one of the large times that we had support. So coming back was not really on my radar to be like, I've got to fend for myself. There was plenty of people asking how they can help, how they can support. That was so helpful. That was super helpful. And it dwindled over time. It's not America's fault. It's just our fault for being in so many countries for decades, you know? And so it's like we burned out our patriotic resources locally. And now we're trying to build it back.
You can correct me if I'm wrong, the Army didn't really have a whole lot of things in place in 2004 for people coming back.
No, they didn't. I think there was not a lot of resources. If you're getting out of the service, you're supposed to go through some processes, resume building, mock job interviews. But it was more of, do you need that? No. They'd sign you off and then you're done. And kind of left our veterans not flapping in the wind. It was their own decision in a sense, but there could have been more emphasis on it, in my opinion, you know. But I also know that the Army, on the same token, doesn't really care about that, to be honest. When I was retiring, a little bit before me, there was a guy who was retiring a month or two prior, and he couldn't make it to his rehearsal for his own retirement ceremony because he had to go to the field. Now, he had already passed his physical. He had already done all his out processing. Doesn't matter. He was going to the field. And so they took him to the field. They took him to the field. You know, and it's like, those are the things. Like, you can't preach that you're there to be supportive and you're there for your soldiers. As a commander, you cannot say that, and then you force them to go to the field and they miss their retirements, or they miss, what is that going to do? It's not a quantifiable, it's not a number. It's ridiculous that that type of stuff occurs. And on social media now, it's every day. If you look at these Army Army WTF moments, and you start looking around the social media, it is getting worse on how command is treating soldiers and their families. It's disheartening. But to get back to the question, there wasn't a lot of resources, but there was some there, respectfully. There were some there, but they were not as developed and valued as important as they are, I think, right now. Yeah.
So were you already slated to go back to Iraq when you got back home, or did you get those orders later on?
No, we were pretty much told, like, don't get too comfortable. So we came back, and we had, if I remember, we were supposed to, here's what it was. We came back, and we were not supposed to have any training for the first 90 days of our return back home. So about 45 days later, we were out in the field. And it was just our platoon sergeant did it. We locked it in, went out to the field, and it wasn't to break us down. It was, we're gonna go out, we're gonna get back to our basics, we're gonna go rehearse, we're gonna go through some of our maneuvers, and we're not doing all day, all night. Like, we're really gonna take it easy, and it was a great experience. And then after that, that kind of was the catalyst to where other platoons are like, now we're going to the field, and we're gonna go to the field. And then it ramped up, and then we started hearing rumors from the platoon sergeant, like, hey, we're probably going to go back to Iraq here soon. So just get ready for that. Yeah. And it was really soon. A year and some change, I think, later, yeah.
So like early 05?
Yeah, we got 2003, came back in 04. Yeah, early 2005, March, April. I'd have to check some papers. But yeah, and then I just know that we packed up and went back out. And we did that. And that was a rotation for a lot of units. Especially the armor units were doing that. But
at full years, not 6 months?
No, we were doing full years. Mm-hmm. Yeah, 12 months.
So where did they send you for your second tour?
Where did I go on my second tour? Falcon, yeah. Falcon. And Falcon was okay. It was just another thing. It was more of mounted patrols, late night observation, same thing. Just kind of at this time though, Baghdad was all the concrete barriers were up, and so you just you weren't looking at anything. You're just driving around.
Falcon sounds familiar. Did they get hit with a V-bid?
Every place has been hit with V-bids. What happened at Falcon, I want to say it was like in '04. They took, I believe, a mortar round that hit their ammo supply point, and it was just a fireworks display for hours of rockets and everything. It was pretty messed up. I want to say that was '04, maybe '05. Because when we got there, that area was just kind of off limits. We didn't even know what it was. It was just an off limits area. So, yeah, and it was just more of, it felt more of a training deployment, honestly, because they already had Burger King and Taco Bell and stuff set up. It wasn't going out all night, even though we did on some occasion. But that was the time that I believe the Iraqi prime minister, or whoever was in charge at the time, started saying like, hey, start cutting all your night patrols. You can do it all during the day, but at night, stop. So they were starting to get minimized. But there wasn't anything that really kind of stuck out in mind from Falcon. It was just the daily grind of getting work done.
Mike, you were saying that was when the IEDs got pretty prevalent.
Yeah. And so not going out at night, that was giving them the opportunity. It makes the days a lot longer. So, but yeah, it was just a portion of being deployed, just getting in the grind.
So a year from that, be '06, I guess you come home another year down, and then '07 you went back out?
To Taji. Yeah, if I remember.
And this is part of the surge?
There was a surge going on. I don't think we were designated as part of this surge. I think because we were on a rotational cycle in a sense, we weren't mixed in with that. But Taji was a pretty unique experience. During the invasion, we actually went through Taji. So during the invasion, as we were driving through, we did go through Taji, and there was actually this huge airplane hangar that had a rocket dropped on it, and exploded. And we started looking around and just kind of wondering what was in there. And we actually found 50 caliber machine guns that were ours, given to Iraq probably decades ago. But they were brand new, still in the crates. When we were driving through, our 50 cals were already deadlined. They didn't work. We deployed with non-working equipment. We didn't have body armor. So we're driving through in the invasion piece with no body armor and no working crew serve weapons. When we got to Taji and we found these 50 cals, we basically pulled them, scrapped them, threw them in our vehicles, and then we built our own 50 cals out of scrap parts so we can have functional weapons. And that's what it was. That's how things worked. But now going through Taji the second time, it wasn't on fire no more. It was an airfield. They had aircraft and plenty of people running around. A lot of people were at Taji. Dining facilities were large, and they had markets, and it was a big change. It was a big change, and we just said, let's make the best of it, but we're still back to the basics. So get down motor pool, fix your vehicles, let's get weapons. And we just stayed in that mode most of the time, and still did plenty of patrols. And we did a few dismounted patrols at Taji, but not a lot. And then we do know that our gate did take a V-bid at one time, but nothing really kind of hit us until we were about to leave country. So they moved us out of our little living areas. We had these little, they called them chews that we were living in, and they moved us into these big warehouses. And it was right next to Highway 1, and so we're in these big warehouses just waiting for the day to tell us we're gonna leave. But we still had people that were working with the incoming unit going on patrols, and one of our scout vehicles that was in our unit hit a really bad IED, really bad. That was the last patrol of that vehicle. This was the last patrol. They were going to go up, turn around, come back, come in. They were done, and on the way going up, they hit an IED, and it bent the vehicle up, crushed a few people in there, and then caused this, I can't remember his name, but basically he gets swelling of the brain and of the eye will swell up to like where it's just crucially painful because it's pushing against the bone. And he, I mean, funny guy. I just can't remember his name right now. But he was the one that took the hit really, really bad. And that was one of the largest IEDs I'd heard in a while. It was so large, like you could feel that bass vibration come from it. That's just how large it was. I was like, man, somebody took it. And it was one of our guys, yeah. Yeah, he survived. He's not on social media or whatever, but I know he did survive at the time. I did see him when we got back to America, and he was already lined up with a bunch of surgeries. They were gonna get in and like loosen up some bones, and yeah. I wish I remembered his name.
Well, I appreciate you sharing his story. It's tough to hear. And to think that's, one incident out of how many thousands across all the years we were there.
Yeah, and I don't want to be morbid about it. We had in our unit, actually in our troop, we had a catastrophic hit on a vehicle where it killed everybody in the vehicle. And then my commander, Ian Weichel, he was killed by an EFP. And that's a big hit when you lose your commander. And he wasn't one of those. He wasn't just like a commander. He was like your guy. He was the one that you knew he would have your back. He would have your back no matter what. He would have your back. And he would always walk around. He'd always shake your hand, ask you how you were doing. West Point graduate. On Fort Carson, there's an elementary school named after him. And there's a pretty famous, I think it's a famous picture of Arlington Cemetery where the little story blurb is this guy goes and visits his best friend and drinks a beer with him every Sunday, and it's a headstone, and the guy has like his feet kicked up. That's Ian Weichel. That's his headstone. And if I remember correctly, the feet kicked up is his brother. So.
Any memorable stories between you two?
He just two primarily stick out was when I first got to that troop and he was the commander, shook his hand, said hello, and we had already talked a few times, just shooting, and then it was one morning I went in to his office and I had to give him something, and I said, "Hey sir, here you go." He goes, "Hey, thanks, Sergeant Chavez. Hey, this is my wife." He introduced me to his wife. And then she goes, "Oh, you're Sergeant Chavez." I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Heard a lot of great things about you." And I was very, smart aleck with it. It's like, "But we just met." And she said, "Ian talks about you all the time." At that time, that's when it kind of realized, this guy goes home and just talks about his soldiers. Something good happened, something great, or a funny thing he heard about somebody. He goes home and tells those stories. And I was like, this guy's in tune with his soldiers. He's in tune with his troop, and that's an amazing thing. And then, so while we were at Taji, we were at a patrol base that was set up, and I had to re-enlist. I re-enlisted at the patrol base, and he was my re-enlistment officer. And the picture is in this building that's completely dirty. I have one uniform on. My gear is a different pattern. Two different patterns is all my gear. He has a uniform on. His gear is two different patterns. We have a guy in coveralls, and then we have Jarrett Asplin, who looks like the model soldier, standing there, and shook his hand, and he said, "Hey, part of this is I want you to take your time now and go back home, take your time off, your mid-tour leave." And I said, "Okay." So I make my mid-tour leave. It takes me about a week to get home. and then I'm home in Texas. Yeah, I was in Texas. I was there just for a few days, and then I got a call from Iraq, from my driver, my gunner at the time. And then he said, "Hey, man, Captain Weichel just hit EFP." And I was like, damn it. And I knew I was going to go back anyway in a few days. So I was getting updates that, he hit the EFP. It was a very, very rough hit where he took it to the head. He was still alive on the helicopter as they moved him to, I think he went to Baghdad, Maine. And then after that, they got him to Germany, and he was still alive in Germany. And then he died while under surgery, is my understanding. When I got back to Iraq, the next day is when we had his memorial service. So, I didn't get to really spend a crazy amount of time with him, but I do know that he went out on patrols and he was out there doing the good fight, and he was a great guy. So,
he sounds awesome.
I
appreciate you.
Yeah, he was great, man. He was great.
Let me make sure I get his last name spelled correctly.
Yeah, Weichel, Weikeel. A-L? I'd have to look at him. Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, the school is dedicated to him, and he's gotten a bunch of things just because he was such a prominent officer, that everybody just knew who he was, and yeah, he was a good dude. He was really, really good dude. So yeah, Captain Weichel, and then Taji time is over, and moving forward, come back home.
You did Afghanistan with 710, Kev? Is that right?
I did, yes.
What year was that?
09 to 2010.
Interesting time to be in Afghanistan. Things were, I think, ramping up pretty heavily.
On the central to eastern side of the country, it was ramping up. Restrepo, the incident at Restrepo was pretty fresh in everybody's mind. And then we were in RC West. So we were in the northwestern portion of Afghanistan, and it wasn't a poppin' area. But they put us up on this crazy mountain pass up on the top.
That's the dusty part of Afghanistan, right?
I think if you went up a little bit more, probably, we were still in the mountain area. So it was more of blinding sunlight until we got snow, and then it was 6 to 9 feet of snow when that would happen. And we didn't have a lot of action at all, really. It was just a lot of governance going on where our commander was really just trying to appease the locals and make business propositions and, get them involved, working with tribes. And
I was about to ask, do you recall what tribes were in that region?
I do not know, yeah. Tribes and sheikhs, they were doing all that stuff. I was just basically running the camp. So we had a really weird logistical setup, but it worked for us. So we weren't really doing as many mortar missions as we used to do, and we were split between so many different locations that we were just kind of living in our own little cities and still running logistics with our primary base, which that guy was just sending things via helicopter most of the time. So we'd get just a helicopter come kick out our mail, and then they'd leave. So it was a quiet deployment, nothing too crazy. So.
Well, for the people at home, could you just kind of elaborate on the big differences between all your experiences in Iraq and then being in Afghanistan for the first time? What you noticed?
Yeah. I think the first noticeable item would be the weather. Iraq was primarily just very, very hot and humid. You would get the dry heat. And where I was at in Afghanistan, it wasn't blazing hot. It was sunny, but it was more of a cooler type of temperature, just being in the mountains. It did snow in Baghdad when I was there one time, and it was just flurries. But then in Afghanistan, we're literally talking 6 feet of snow overnight. So now you're waiting for the sun to come back out to melt it all so you can move around. And being in Iraq, you're on the ground level, you're working every day, you're working with locals and interpreters, you're working with local contractors, and you're in pretty much of a city environment as their country is like set up. That's the closest thing you're going to get to a big city is how they have it set up. And it kind of feels like there's a norm there because there's buildings and there's cars and buses and police driving around, sirens, fire department. They have those things. And then you get to certain portions of Afghanistan, they don't. It's dirt roads and mud huts and dried out creek beds where they're praying for rain so they can get some water. And it's just, as we progress from an invasion into a country, into two countries kind of, and then 20 years later, there is going to be a stark difference with how that country looks and operates. And where we were at in Afghanistan, it was just more of a, we're here to provide government assistance and guidance and help you establish your local councils. And that's what was primarily going on there. And a lot of cigar smoking. I smoked a lot of cigars in Afghanistan. Yeah.
So any memorable stories from that tour that stick out to you?
Afghanistan?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be combat or anything, just anything that...
You know, one of my good friends, we still talk. He's here in Colorado, and I'll give him a shot. His name is Rio Herrera, and Rio is a big kid. He's just a big kid. He loves movies, he loves comic books, artwork. He just loves all that stuff. And he connected with, well, we all connected with a supporter of our troop. And usually people would ask their supporter, like, can you send me some socks, maybe some gloves or something? Not Rio. He was like, I would need pots and pans, cans of soup. I want a bread maker. Like he was just asking for whatever he could ask for. The guy sent us everything. The guy spent thousands of dollars to support us. He sent us packages nearly every other week of just food, socks, movies, whatever you needed. He was going to go get it. And so Rio got his bread maker and with all the stuff. So Rio was literally making loaves of like bread for everybody, but it would be like the mixing stuff for like blueberry muffins, but he would put it in the bread maker. So he'd make a nice little loaf of blueberry muffin bread. Or he'd make like lemon bread or something. And then he had kind of like this hot plate that would boil water or whatever, but he used it for soup. And so he'd be making soup and bread for everybody, like sourdough. And he wasn't even a cook. He was our maintenance guy. He was a mechanic. But he just set himself up, and we'd go into we had a tent that we shared, and we had it all kind of partitioned off. And in his area, you'd hear a spoon and he's eating, and he'd be watching a movie laughing. Like that guy was not on a deployment. That guy was on a little vacation for himself. He was just enjoying it the best way he could. And I still see him all the time. I see him almost every week or every other week. I see him, and the guy hasn't changed. Always smiles, and he's a great guy to just kind of have in your corner. And if you need him, like, hey, I need something, he'll be like, what do you need? I got you. You know. I really, really respect him. I love that dude. He's great with my family, and our families do hang out together, and we spend Halloween together. He has a ridiculous Halloween party. It's the only time I wear a costume is to his parties. I don't wear it anywhere else, only to his parties. So I really value his friendship, and yeah, he was always about it. And then we had a lieutenant, Greg Bassett, and Greg was, he's a great guy. He had actually got a package from his mom, and we think maybe a picture, maybe candy, or no. It was his Xbox. He got his Xbox with like a little TV and everything. Like he got this full setup for him in his sleeping area. And I think he was playing Halo at the time. I don't remember. But we had shifts set up. He's like, ooh, I only got a little bit more time. Then I'm going to go back to my hooch. We're like, for what? He's like, my Xbox is here. And when you would look in, he had it set up, Xbox TV. It was just his thing. That's just what he wanted to do. You know, it was a good breakaway for him. So, because we give him a lot of crap. We gave him a lot of crap. But he's a great officer, and my understanding is he's still in. He's still in. He's still serving, married, kid, all that stuff. Yeah, he's doing really well. So
Go for the full 30 years, I'm sure.
I don't know what he's. I don't know what he's gonna do. He complains a lot, respectively, because there's always things to complain about. I just don't know where he's gonna go next. But wherever he goes, he's gonna be a superstar wherever he goes. Yeah, that guy's awesome. So yeah.
So what'd you do when you got back from Afghanistan?
When I came back, I came back from Afghanistan. I left the unit, and I ended up working at my battalion, my squadron level, and I became the intelligence NCOIC. And I was only there for a little bit of time because that's when Garrett went to go work for the general and said, I'm going to bring you up as a driver, because I was the master driver. So he's like, I'll bring you as a driver. So I ended up going to the command suite as a driver for Lieutenant General Joe Anderson, retired now. And then I drove for about a year, and then I got promoted in 2012 to Sergeant First Class, and then I became a program manager for the SHARP program, which is a sexual harassment / assault response and prevention. So that was under the guidance of President Obama to reestablish this program to start providing services to survivors of rape, sexual assault, harassment. So started building that up, got that program up and running, and then I came on assignment I came on a few assignments, but what ended up happening is I went to Fort Irwin in California and did a few years there as a platoon sergeant. I did less than a year, actually. Then they found out I got the SHARP program up and running, so they made me their SHARP. I served as their regimental SARC, and then I left there, and then I went to the G3 operations, and then I worked in the operations until I retired. And then I retired out, became a contractor on site just for a little bit, went back to where I worked as a GS-11, and then I just had this thought, like, I'm paying for a house in Colorado. Why are we living in the desert? So I quit the GS-11 job, packed up, came out to Colorado, moved right back into our house, July 5th, 2019. Yep.
All right. What are you up to these days?
So these days, I'm kind of all over the place, but one of my passions is music, and so I've always been involved with music. So I have an indie record label. I manage another indie record label, and that other one that I manage, that's with my other best friend, and we are both music supervisors for a movie production studio.
Awesome.
Yeah, and then I also have other odd jobs. Coffee company. I work for this other online academy as a director of operations, and just kind of establishing these lines of revenue. So in the next few years, I won't be doing anything. Yeah, as a shareholder or percentage holder. So yeah, and
But I have a feeling once that cell phone goes silent for a little too long, you might change your tune on that.
Yeah, maybe. We'll see. There was a time I was very, very busy, and it was like day and night. I was getting calls and messages, emails, and I need to be here, I need to be there, and I was enjoying it. But then it just burned me out, and it was all nonprofit stuff. Nonprofit stuff crushed me, so I just kind of like sat back a little bit and just let it run and just try to enjoy my time. And I'm a student, so
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm pursuing my doctorate right now, so I should get it this November.
Cool. And what?
Business administration. Yeah.
Sounds like you should be running that class.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah. No, I think that's why people reach out to me to jump into their companies and get them off they have these ideas, and then they just can't get it off the ground. We get it off the ground, get their first set of income, revenue to come in, and then once revenue's established, I just kind of step back, and that's usually when they're like, hey, we'll give you a percentage of the company or, ownership. So, yeah, so that's just kind of what I do now.
Awesome. Well, a couple of questions to wrap us up today.
Yeah.
What do you want people to remember about the War on Terror based on all your experiences over 10 years?
Wow. What do I want people to remember about the war on terrorism? I think it's important that people should remember that when our soldiers deploy, they volunteered to do whatever they can do for the benefit of America. And if you don't support them, that's your prerogative. But it doesn't give anybody the right to complain or hold a grudge against the soldiers for what they're doing. It's hard work. It is hard work to get deployed to a foreign country, really not knowing what you're going to do and the stuff that they have to go through. And the soldiers thrive on support. They thrive on the thank you for your service. Even though that feels like it may be a little cliched or played out now, there's still soldiers who are like, they want that, you know? It's the same equivalent of a Vietnam veteran. If you see one and you tell them welcome home today and shake his hand or her hand, they value that because they were treated like garbage. We don't need to be treating our soldiers like garbage. And I think it's important that when people consider the war on terrorism, however they consider the war on terrorism, they have the right to voice their opinions, but they also have the right to be supportive of American interest. And I think that's a valuable piece that people overlook because of their influence from social media. And the number one way to just crush people's morals and ethics and their views is to follow the false information on social media. Do your own research, and there's not a conspiracy. We're not there for whatever. There's not a conspiracy. It's decisions made by intelligent people who have been in this industry for decades upon decades. They didn't do this on a whim, you know? And if you feel you need to make a change because you don't like it, then put yourself in the position to make a change. And it's not protesting, even though that's a right, but you can also get into your local government. You can also get into politics and make the change internally. Put your money where your mouth is, not behind a keyboard.
Now, is there any song that if you heard it today would take you back to your days in Iraq or Afghanistan?
Ooh, a song. So, you know, this brings up a discussion that I had before. I won't go off crazy, but Vietnam had a soundtrack associated with them at that time. It's one of the best sounds ever in music, you know, and you hear a song and you're like, sounds like a Vietnam movie, even though it's not, you know, you just associate it. I don't know if we have that for the global war on terrorism, but I think if there was a song, only when I first deployed, that platoon I deployed with, we were watching Indian music TV or something like that. And so it was music that we didn't know. It was all European-based, Asian-based music. And there were some videos, and we have a Facebook page, and we share them. And there was one guy, apparently he's very famous in Europe, but his name is ABS. And we said he was the fake Justin Timberlake. Just because he was dancing in his videos, he was not American, whatever. But that video came on all the time. I just don't. Stoplight is a song. Stoplight by ABS, yeah. But there were so many other ones. We didn't really have a soundtrack, I guess. But there were a few of us that we did share CDs and music and stuff. But that's such a good question.
I think that was the perfect answer because it's not about the soundtrack as much as it is songs you had to listen to out of necessity. Or
yep.
Requirement. It's just you never would have heard that song otherwise, but there it is.
That was it. And actually, you know what? I'm going to add one more. It was Simply Red, a song called Sunrise. And Simply Red, we liked it because the guy was like sitting on a sofa and he had his little permed hair, but he was in this like beautiful setup and those models and in the swimming pool, and he was just sitting there singing. And it was a very chill song, but it was a sample that he had used from Hall & Oates. He took a Hall & Oates sample, reused it, and redid it, and it just sounded cool. And so every time that video came on, we're like, whoa, shh. And we would just watch a video. All right, now we can go on patrol. So the video's over, yeah.
Lastly, any final thoughts, words of advice to anybody watching this in the future, kids, students?
Words of advice. I think if there's anything is there's plenty of people that will always tell you, don't do this. And there's a high probability they didn't do it themselves. Do your own research, stick to your guts, and whatever you do, you will make the best out of it if you want to. But if you show up and you complain about it, you made the wrong decision. It's a lesson learned. It's time to move on. And if you do the military, in my this is how I am. After 21 years in the military, it was a significant portion of my life, but it did not define my life. It was a chapter in my life that helped me become the person I am today, but it doesn't define me. In fact, a lot of people don't even know, when I do meet them, they can't even really tell I was in the military. I don't keep a military haircut. I don't have a hat with my rank on it. I don't host a podcast about my time. I don't do that. I don't have really any military isms, I think. My backpack is probably the closest thing to anything military. But if you live in that, you're putting yourself in a category, and it's hard to kind of get out of that sometimes. Just be true, stick to your guns, and just keep pushing forward, and always try to be smarter than the next.
Well, Rick, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time
Thank
this
you.
morning to share your stories with me. It's an honor and a pleasure, but most importantly, I want to thank you so much for your service. Greatly appreciate you, sir.
Thank you so much.